Hi, good evening, everyone, and welcome to Rev Sherri's Metaphysical Bible Hangout. It is such a joy to be here with you. This Bible class is an extension of Understanding Principles for Better Living Church, where the Reverend Dr. Delarice Lett is the minister and founder. Our Sunday services are every Sunday at 1 o'clock at 600 West Queen Street in Inglewood, California. We would love for you to join us. So if you are ever in the Southern California area, we hope that you will come on by and stop by. And a good time to stop by would actually be this Sunday, because we are doing a special service called Worshiping in Color. Now, this is a beautiful idea that one of our members, Margaret Peterson, came up with, and where there is a themed color that everyone wears, and this year the color is green. And with this color, everyone comes in their color, and we do a whole kind of praise and worship and dance and spoken word, and I mean, it's just a wonderful, remarkable service, and you definitely want to be there. And we have Reverend Desmond Pringle, who's a gospel artist as well as a minister, who's going to be giving the Sunday address. And so we are really excited. So come, if you're in Southern California, come on out, wear your green. And then also know that during this Sunday we take a special offering. This service is a fundraiser for our church. And so we do a special offering. We have green envelopes. It's a whole thing. So come on out and have some fun with us on Sunday. All right, this journey is brought to you and is rooted always in Scripture. And the Scripture that grounds this journey is Romans 12:2. Be not conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, so that you may discern what is the will of God, what is acceptable and good and true. And so right where you are, I'm just going to ask that you just center yourself and just release everything that has happened before this moment. There is only one power, there is only one presence, and that power and presence is God, the good, omnipotent, the everywhere, evenly present Spirit of absolute good. Spirit, we put this class in your hands. We ask that you just move through us for this conversation. Let us say the things to one another that improve our lives and that help us to live our divinity more fully. I anoint this class. I bless it. I name it very good. And I release this prayer in the name and the nature of Jesus the Christ. I let it be so. And so it is. Amen. Hey there, Constance. I'm going to mute you. But of course, if you have a question, go ahead and unmute yourself. All right. So tonight we are going to be looking at Paul. With two things with Paul. We're going to look at the letter to the Galations, and we're also going to look at his third missionary journey. And so I'm going to get started with my slideshow from the current slide. Okay, the Apostle Paul, a man with a mission, a life lived on purpose, and that he did. So Paul writes to the Galatians to defend his teachings that the Gentile converts do not have to conform to Jewish law, and specifically male circumcision. We're going to look at that. And also we're going to look at his third missionary journey, because there is some great work that he actually accomplishes in Ephesus. And specifically, he does some amazing healings, and he also offers challenges to the worship of false idols. And we're going to take a look at that work. And I think that you'll find some really good metaphysical lessons in that. And so we're going to start with the Epistle to the Galatians, and then the two things that we're going to pay attention to in the third missionary journey are specifically spiritual healing and chemicalization. And then we're going to look at what are the lessons that we have and that we can take away from Paul's experiences in Ephesus, and also in responding to what's happening in the churches in Galatia. So the Epistle to the Galatians. So basically what happens with Paul is that Paul establishes several churches in Galatia. And then there are people that are called Judaizers that come behind him telling and apparently convincing the believers that they have to practice circumcision for salvation. So let me back up a little bit and kind of give you a little bit of history on that. So one of the things that happens is that, again, you got to remember, these are all Jews. That even though we're using the term Christian and we're using the term Christianity, Christianity at that point in history was a sect of Judaism. It would be like New Thought Christianity to what we think of as tradition. It's not really traditional Christianity because there is no such thing as traditional Christianity, but what has come to be known as traditional Christianity, it would be a relationship like that, where they're using they're using the same Bible, using the same text, which is the Hebrew Scriptures. There is no New Testament at this point. They are using the Hebrew Scriptures and they are interpreting them differently. The thing about Judaism is that when scholars look at early Judaism, what they say is that it's almost better to talk about early Judaisms because there were so many different ways to be Jewish, and there were different Jewish sects. You had the Pharisees, you had the Sadducees. These are the ones that we know about. You had the Pharisees, the Sadducees, the Essenes, and then there's a fourth group. We don't know anything else about them other than through the historian Josephus, and he called it the fourth philosophy. And so they were these different groups of people. Paul himself was a Pharisee. So all of them, though, had different ways of thinking about keeping the Mosaic law. And the Mosaic law was the law of God. Now, because of the way that we have been taught about Judaism, we think of keeping the law as this onerous burden. But in the first century Palestinian mind, keeping the law was not about this back-breaking thing that you could never live up to. It was an honor to keep the law. What do I mean by that? Well, we have a different way of thinking about it now, especially because we're in the 21st century. But in our minds, you do something to curry God's favor. You know, even though in New Thought we try to say that no, we don't, but we still try in some way to set up our system where it is that you are trying to do something to curry God's favor or to work the law, right? In the Jewish mind at that time in history, it wasn't like that. God's favor had already been given. The law was a way that you lived up to your privilege. So the best way to think about it is that, you know, in the U.S. we don't really have a royal family, right? But in Great Britain they do. They, you know, and we see them on pictures on People magazine and all these other places. And with the law, with being in the royal family, there is a way to be, because you have been born into royal lineage, and so there is a way for you to live that is living up to the privilege of being in the royal family. And it's not necessarily an onerous burden. It's that I have been chosen, I have been set apart. And this is how Jews saw themselves. We have been set apart by God. That our God is the one true God, and He chose us. And so the law then is not this back-breaking thing that you have to keep, but rather it is our honor to keep the law. Now, when Paul comes along, that understanding of the law is still there. What he is arguing for is a different way to see the law. So I want to make that clear. He's arguing for a different way to see the law. And one of the things that happens in Judaism is that there's this group that develops this apocalyptic point of view of how life is supposed to be, or what's going to happen to make life right. So they believe that they were God's chosen people. But here's the thing, they were God's chosen people and they did not have their own autonomy. So just to give you kind of a brief history of Israel, that they were united under King David. They divided under King Rehoboam, who is Solomon's son. So let's back up. So Moses leads them out of the wilderness, and now they're just basically these warring tribes. Sometimes they get along, sometimes they work together, sometimes they don't, most times they don't. They decide that they want a king. Samuel appoints Saul. Saul has mental illness, and he goes and he appoints David. David ends up uniting the 12 tribes. And so for the first time in history, they are united as a nation. This is significant because before then, they did not have a national identity. But now they are united as a nation, and they are sovereign, meaning that they determine what happens to them. We don't really have any other way to think about that in the U.S. because we have, for all of our lifetimes, the U.S. has been a sovereign nation. That whenever we have gone to war, we have won to the extent that our sovereignty has never been called into question or taken away from us. So it's hard to think of what it means to live in an occupied territory where you're of a different nationality, but there is some foreign country that is controlling your everyday coming and going. And so with Israel, they are a sovereign nation. Now, David, if you remember from the Hebrew scriptures, does not get permission from God to build the temple. God says, I'm going to let your son Solomon build a temple. Solomon builds a temple, but he does it at the expense of a back-breaking tax on the people. And the people, when Solomon passes away and his son Rehoboam comes to the throne, the 10 northern tribes, of which is called Israel, come to Rehoboam and say, look, dude, your dad was hardcore. We can't go on like this. We need you to kind of ease up. Rehoboam basically says, oh, you think my daddy was bad? Watch what I do. And he increases the tax on them and the back-breaking projects on them. And so they end up breaking away. And so they retain the name Israel. And so you'll hear the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom. The northern kingdom is Israel. The southern kingdom is Judah. The thing about the southern kingdom is that that's where the temple is. So even though people lived in the north, they traveled down south because in the temple is where the ritual animal sacrifice happened. So you may worship God in the synagogue in your area, but when you get ready to participate in the ritual sacrifice, which is how you care for God, right? Because it was not in antiquity, believing in God was not, you don't really believe in God, you care for God. So it was about what you do, and the things that you do are prayer and sacrifice. And for Jews, sacrifice only happens in the temple. Now, the northern kingdom ends up being conquered by the Assyrians, which is like the superpower of the day. The Assyrians take the inhabitants of the northern kingdom and scatter them to wherever, and they are lost to the pages of history. So when we talk about the 10 lost tribes of Israel, what we're talking about is that they have been lost to the pages of history. We do not know, there is no written record to support whatever happened to those people that were living in the northern kingdom. So they scatter them and then resettle new people there. The southern kingdom, Judah, stands for another 150 years. But it then falls to the Babylonians. And the Babylonians conquer differently. What they do is they come in and take the cream of the crop and put them in service to the Babylonian government. And so what you essentially have are the heroes of the faith, men like Daniel, Meshach, Shadrach, Abednego, where they basically begin to work in service to the Babylonian government. And the Babylonians, so what has happened is, and they also destroy the temple. What has happened is that essentially the Israel is no longer a sovereign state. Israel, the northern kingdom, has fallen away, and Judah has been by Assyria, and Judah, the southern kingdom, has been conquered by the Babylonians. So Israel, by the 4th or 5th, 6th century, 587 BCE, is not a sovereign state. They don't become a sovereign state again for another 400 years. They remain under foreign rule for another 100 years. There are a couple of things that happen in there, but basically how they regain their autonomy is that there's a group called the Maccabees, and you guys have probably heard the term the Maccabean Revolt. The Maccabees end up driving the Syrian army, which is the latest superpower that has control over them, out of Jerusalem. And they end up rededicating the temple and instituting the celebration of Hanukkah, which is the celebration of the rededication of the temple. The temple is important because it's where God lives. For Jews, God, yes, God is in the sky, but God is also, when he dwells in his temple, remember, because all the scriptures say the Lord is in the temple, let all the earth be silent before him. The temple, he lived, he dwelt in the Holy of Holies. What sets the Jews off more than anything else is that the Syrians, who at that point have conquered them, come in and start and make them make sacrifices to pagan gods in the temple. The Maccabees are like, that's it. I've had it. I'm kicking your butt. Get out of my house. Get out of my country. Get out of my land. And they have about 100 years where they are autonomous. And then they decide they're going to fight the Roman government, and they revolt, and the Pax Romana, the peacekeeping forces, slaughter them, and the temple is destroyed. So when Paul and Jesus come along, there is this apocalyptic point of view that is already in the Jewish mind that it's not right, that things are the way that they are. We are God's chosen people, and we don't even have control over our own homeland. And so when you read the apocalyptic literature like Revelation, like Daniel, like Ezekiel, when you read this apocalyptic literature, what you hear is this idea that God is going to intervene in the course of history and make everything right again. That Israel is going to be restored. And so whenever you are reading this literature, you're always seeing them painting this picture of the New Jerusalem. So when Paul comes along, it is not about getting rid of the law. What Paul is arguing for is that here is, with the death and the crucifixion and the resurrection of Jesus, essentially all of the other requirements of the law have been fulfilled, and what remains is simply for us to love one another, because we have been justified by faith and not by works. To justify means to be made right by God. So I hope that kind of helps you understand this apocalyptic point of view, that it would be the equivalent that's the only thing I can think of, and because this will give kind of a point of reference, it would be like in this country where we had mass enslavement of Africans. And in the African mind, there is this belief that swing low, sweet chariot coming for to carry me home. And this is passing down through the people. It's in the nature of how we think about the world, that things are going to be made right, that God is going to intervene in the course of history and swing low, sweet chariot coming for to carry me home. I'm going to be restored back to my rightful place. It's not right. So what the Jews had in their mentality was this idea that we are God's chosen people, that we have been set aside for a special purpose, and so there are some evil forces at work, and those evil forces are why the world looks the way that it does. This is in the mind of Jesus. This is in the mind of Paul. This is in the mind of all of the Jews of this time. It is a dominant point of view. So when we're reading this literature, we cannot not account for the world that they are talking about. And there was always a conversation about a Jewish Messiah who was coming. This is always there. The other thing that I want you to know, and I'm going to share this with you, this is from, this is a great book to have, Bart Ehrman, New Testament, excellent scholarship. I hope I can find it quickly. Okay, so here's the thing. People understand the world in light of what they already know, right? So if we went back to the 1950s and started talking about cell phones and the ability to communicate wirelessly, and let's say there were some teenagers that were in the 50s and we got transported back, and we walked up to them and said, excuse me, can I borrow your phone? And we're not at their house, we're out at school, and we walk up to them and say, hey, excuse me, can I borrow your phone? What? You want to go to my house and get my phone? But you got to use it at the house. There's no point of reference. So people understand when you hear information, when you're hearing what I'm telling you right now, you're hearing it in light of what you already know, right? So I want you to understand that when people are hearing the stories about Jesus, they're hearing them in light of what they already know. So I'm going to read you this. From the beginning, his mother knew. From the beginning, his mother knew that he was no ordinary person. Prior to his birth, a heavenly figure appeared to her, announcing that her son would not be a mere mortal, but would himself be divine. This prophecy was confirmed by the miraculous character of his birth, a birth accompanied by supernatural signs. The boy was already recognized as a spiritual authority in his youth. His discussions with recognized experts showed his superior knowledge of all things religious. As an adult, he left home to engage in an itinerant preaching ministry. He went from village to town with his message of good news, proclaiming that people should forego their concerns for the material things of this life, such as how they should dress and what they should eat. They should instead be concerned with their eternal souls. He gathered around him a number of disciples who were amazed by his teaching and his flawless character. They became convinced that he was no ordinary man, but was the Son of God. Their faith received striking confirmation in the miraculous things he did. He could reportedly predict the future, heal the sick, cast out demons, and raise the dead. Not everyone proved friendly, however. At the end of his life, his enemies trumped up charges against him, and he was placed on trial before Roman authorities for crimes against the state. Even after he departed this realm, however, he did not forsake his devoted followers. Some claimed that he had ascended bodily into heaven. Others said that he had appeared to them alive afterward, that they had talked with him and touched him and become convinced that he could not be bound by death. A number of his followers spread the good news about this man, recounting what they had seen him say and do. Eventually, some of these accounts came to be written down in books that circulated throughout the empire. But I doubt that you have ever read them. In fact, I suspect you have never heard the name of this miracle-working Son of God. The man I have been referring to is the great Neo-Pythagorean teacher and pagan holy man of the 1st century CE, Apollonius Tyana, a worshiper of the Roman gods whose life and teachings are still available for us in the writings of his later 3rd century followers, Philostratus, in his book, The Life of Apollonius. Apollonius lived at about the time of Jesus. Even though they never met, the reports about their lives were in many ways similar. At a later time, Jesus' followers argued that Jesus was the miracle-working Son of God and that Apollonius was an impostor, a magician, and a fraud. Perhaps not surprisingly, Apollonius' followers made just the opposite claim, asserting that he was the miracle-working Son of God and that Jesus was a fraud. What is remarkable is that these were not the only two persons in the Greco-Roman world who were thought to have been supernaturally endowed as teachers and miracle workers. In fact, we know from the tantalizing but fragmentary records that have survived that numerous other persons were also said to have performed miracles, to have calmed the storm and multiplied the loaves, to have told the future and healed the sick, to have cast out demons and raised the dead, to have been supernaturally born and taken up into heaven at the end of their life. Even though Jesus may be the only miracle-working Son of God that we know about in our world, he was one of many talked about in the first century. So when Paul is arguing that Jesus is the Son of God, he's arguing that Jesus is he's the real deal, and these other sons of God that are also being talked about are not true. So I want you to kind of get this. And because when people start to call his philosophy into question, he has to defend himself, and this is part of what happens with the letter to the Galatians. So with the letter to the Galatians, essentially what is happening is that Paul has taught that the Gentiles do not need to be circumcised, that when they convert, they don't need to be circumcised, because that would mean that then you were made right with God by works, right? That would mean that you were not justified by faith. Paul's whole teaching hinges on you are justified by faith, not by what you do. And again, this is not about currying favor with God. This is about living up to the privilege of who you are. So for the Gentiles, Paul is saying you don't have to be circumcised. And he gets a decision from the Jewish Supreme Court, the Sanhedrin, that supports it. And he gets the authority of Peter and James, who side with him, who basically sway the council in his favor that, no, you don't have to be circumcised. But everybody is not in agreement with that. And we don't know all of what the opponents taught, but we know that that was probably the biggest issue, because it's the only thing Paul wrote about in the Galatians. The entire letter is written to refute the people who have come to the Galatians after Paul has left to say that, no, really, you do need to be circumcised. And so when Paul hears this, he essentially goes off and he sends this letter to them. And what's interesting is that it's the only letter that Paul does not start with thanking the church. Every other letter he starts by thanking the church. And this one, he goes right into just, let me tell you why what I'm telling you is the truth, and goes from there. What is interesting, and I do want to point this out for those who want to understand just metaphysics, in Galatians chapter 4, Paul actually uses a metaphysical argument to explain why the Gentiles can be considered children of the promise. So the circumcision was considered a mark of the covenant, right? It was the closest thing that I can think of in modern day is that, in fraternities and some sororities, I don't know why they do that, but in some fraternities for sure, the men will brand themselves. It is it's a way of saying I'm a part of this group. That's a little bit of a stretch, because one is religious, the other is not, but you get the point. So the circumcision was a mark that you were part of God's chosen. So for Paul to come and say, no, you don't need to do that, was an affront to the Jewish mind. Even though he's a Jew who feels differently. So he has to explain to them why it is that even though you are not doing the things of Judaism that mark you for God, how it is you can still be considered a children of the covenant. And if you look at Galatians chapter 4, verse 21, it said he basically gives a metaphysical or an allegorical argument with the allegory of Hagar and Sarah, and he says, tell me, you who desire to be subject to the law, will you not listen to the law? For it is written that Abraham had two sons, one by a slave woman and the other by a free woman. One, the child of the slave, was born according to the flesh, The other, the child of the free woman, was born through the promise. Now this is an allegory. These women are two covenants. One woman, in fact, is Hagar from Mount Sinai, bearing children for slavery. Now Hagar is Mount Sinai in Arabia and corresponds to present Jerusalem, for she is in slavery with her children. But the other woman corresponds to the Jerusalem above. She is free, and she is our mother, for it is written, "Rejoice, you childless one, you who bear no children. Burst into song and shout, you who endure no birth pangs, for the children of the desolate woman are more numerous than the children of the one who is married." Now you, my dear friends, are children of the promise like Isaac. But just as at that time the child who was born according to the flesh persecuted the child who was born according to the Spirit, so it is also now. But what does the scripture say? Drive out the slave and her child, for the child of the slave will not share the inheritance with the child of the free woman. So then, friends, we are children not of the slave, but of the free. For freedom Christ has set us free. Stand firm, therefore, and do not submit again to the yoke of slavery. The only way that you can buy Paul's argument that the Gentiles are children of the promise is that you have to accept his metaphysical reasoning. So, and you know, I don't do a lot of talking on like the history of metaphysical interpretation, but I do want to show you that there is evidence in our own Bible of metaphysical interpretation. So that from none other than Sir Paul. The only way that you can buy his story, the only way that you can buy his explanation of how it is that the Gentiles can be considered children of the promise is that you've got to buy into the metaphysical argument. So I just wanted to hand that to you in case, you know, I know folks try to beat you over the head with the metaphysics. You can tell them Paul used metaphysics. All right, spiritual healing. So one of the things that happens when Paul is in Ephesus, in his third missionary journey, he spends about 3 years in Ephesus. And Ephesus metaphysically represents desire. It's that sense state of consciousness. And one of the things that happens is that Paul does a really great healing work in Ephesus while he's there. And you can see that some evidence of that in the 19th chapter of Acts. Healing is a byproduct of teaching yourself the truth. You always draw a result from that which you continually do. If you are not getting a result in an area of your life, it is because you have not put your behavior on automatic in that area. So the Ephesus is desire. We have to clean up our desire center. Most of us don't get results in our lives because our desire is mixed. We want after the things of the flesh, we want after the things of the spirit, and we're just kind of all over the place. And so there's no there's not enough clarity in the heart for the spirit to move on. The energy intelligence that is God moves when you make a clear and clean decision. And so metaphysically, this work that Paul is doing in Ephesus is the word of truth staying there and working with the desire center, cleaning up these mixed states of consciousness, cleaning it out, doing its work. And essentially what happens is that when your desire is pure, the energy intelligence that is God can move on it. So most times we're not able to get where we want to go in our experience because we're waffling back and forth. We're just kind of all over the place. You have to say, this is what I want, period. You've got to eliminate whatever the other choices are. You are going to have to commit to whatever it is that you say that you want. So this is key. With anything it is that you're doing, you have to drill down and say, this is what I want, this and nothing else. It is that clarity that moves the energy intelligence. And so when things show up in your life in a halfway, it is because you have not cleaned up your desire. Another way to say it is that whatever it is that you want, you've got to be completely congruent with it. You can't say, I want a relationship, and then you're not completely congruent with wanting a relationship. You cannot say, I want to be debt-free and not be completely congruent, because when you are not congruent in your heart with whatever it is that you say that you want, it manifests in your behavior. So you may say, I want to be debt-free, but you haven't cleared it up in your heart, right? So out of the heart come the issues of life. So you want to be debt-free, but the heart is doing or producing behavior that is counter to debt-free. You must become single-pointed in your focus. And so this work that Paul is doing in Ephesus is essentially cleaning out those mixed states of consciousness and cleaning out the areas where the desire is all over the place. And we must do the same thing. One of the things that it talks, he does some healing, and this is Acts chapter 19, verse 11 and 12, and it says, and God did extraordinary miracles by the hands of Paul, so that handkerchiefs or aprons were carried away from his body to the sick, and diseases left him, and the evil spirits came out of them. That when the word of truth is in your desire center, when you are teaching yourself on a continual basis, that you are using your affirmations, that you are committed with your prayer, you are committed with your spiritual study, that when you are doing that, you cannot help but produce a result. In fact, if you don't have results, then you've got to start looking at what it is that you're doing. This is one of the lessons that I had to really sit down with this week. That, looking at my website, looking at the development of my business and my ministry, my business is important for me because it's what allows me to do ministry full time. And so I had to really get honest and say, you know what, this is not really growing. This is not moving the way that I want it to move. And so I've got to examine what it is that I'm doing. I get up, I work every day. But am I doing the things that produce results? You will know them by their fruit. If you are not getting results, you have to be sensitive enough and honest enough with yourself to go back and look at what it is that you're doing and examine your behavior and examine those places where you're not congruent with your stated desire. With the Spirit, there is always fruit. The fruit of the Spirit, this is what Paul says at the end of Galations. I'm trying to turn to it in chapter 6. The fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, generosity, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. There is no law against such things. That when you are working with Spirit, when you are doing the work, you must get results. It's just how it works. You get results. So if you don't have results, then you really do have to question what's happening in my desire center. Where do I need to clean out my desire so that what I say I want, that I am completely congruent in my heart with what I say I want. That is key. There is no substitute for it, and it is the thing that will produce results in your life all time. I'm going to take one of Bright's questions. He says, the Apostle Paul never received the gospel from man, but by the revelation of Jesus Christ. Shall it then be perverted or transformed by man into another meaning for pleasing men? Bright, I'm not sure if I understand your question, but I think I do. I think what you're asking is that the different interpretations on Paul. So let's go back a couple of things. The first is that you got to understand that Paul invented his gospel, and he can say he got it from God, but who can argue with that, right? And it's kind of hard, the way you shut a religious argument down is you say God told me. That's the first thing you do, and all right, game over, right? If God told you, He didn't tell me, He told you. But secondly, is to please understand that these stories that we are getting from our Bible are centuries old. The earliest reasonably complete document that we have, we don't have any originals. None. There are absolutely no originals. Secondly, the language that Jesus spoke was Aramaic. We know that our Gospels were written in Greek, and for a few reasons. One is that you can't read. There's lots of places where you can't even retranslate back into the Aramaic because it's an impossibility to work backwards. So Greek is the language that it was written in. But these stories were passed down orally. So let's think about just this conversation that we're having here. And you may hear something tonight that may be helpful for your life. You're going to go and tell someone, right? And you're going to tell someone, hey, I took this Bible class on YouTube, and this woman said blah, 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 blah. And it really helped me. But you're giving your interpretation of it. There is no such thing as an objective point of view. Everything comes through your consciousness. Everything is filtered through your worldview, and Paul had a worldview. Paul was an apocalyptic teacher. He believed that the end was near, not the end of the world like destruction of the planet, but end of the way things are looking, and that that God is going to intervene in history, and Israel is going to be put back in its right place. This is what he believed. And so you cannot discount the world view. The worldview of the teacher. You can't discount my worldview. What I'm sharing with you is filtered through my worldview. So you must always consider that, and you cannot. And this is why you cannot drill down on the literal words that someone is saying, because the literal words are a function of the culture they were raised in, how they were brought up, who taught them. All of that is such a part of how someone looks at a text, Paul included. The challenge is that we have been told that you cannot question the Bible. If you do, you're going to hell. And, I mean, all kinds of craziness. And so essentially what you do is you go to church, you put your trunk, you open, before you get out of it, you walk in the sanctuary, you open the trunk, unzip your head, put your brain in the trunk, close it, and then you go to church. And then you come back out, and then you actually operate by the laws of God in your business life, because you know you couldn't do that stupid stuff in your business life. There's no place on earth where you could try to reap where you have not sown in your business life. People would laugh you out of the markets. And somehow we think that this is somehow separate from our spirituality. So we really got to become thinkers. Time is out for this kind of blind, foolish thinking. Question everything. Because what you're trying to get to is the Spirit of God inside of you, and the Spirit of God inside of you has no name. It's not called Jesus. It's not called Buddha. It's not called Christ. Because I know I use that term a lot. It's not called anything. It's just silence. It's sheer silence. And different people describe it differently. Elijah spoke about it as a still small voice. Moses spoke about it as a burning bush. Jesus spoke about it as the spirit that you must worship in spirit and truth. But at the end of the day, everybody has to get to the silence. Everybody has to get to that place inside of them. So when we talk about every knee shall bow, it's not bowing to some man. Come on. It is bowing to the spirit, the silence that resides in your own being. So you have to learn to listen to the voice of God inside of you and try the spirit by the spirit. And you know it by its fruit. Look at the fruit. If there's no fruit, and you have to be that relentless in your own experience. You also ask the question, we can be transformed, but should the Holy Bible be transformed also? And yes, can that not change the original meanings and principles of the Holy Bible? Can that not be as contrary to the books of Deuteronomy 4:2, Proverbs 36, Revelations 22:18? Okay, so the transformation, let me back up. The Bible doesn't say anything, right? These are words. You read them and you get something from them. I read them and I get something from them. But whatever you and I both get is a function of what the worldview that we bring to it. It's just like I was telling you that if you went back to the 50s and you, asked someone to borrow their cell phone, they would look at you like, what? You want to do what? You mean a telephone? No. Let me see your cell phone. Actually, you know what? Do you have a smartphone? Oh, wait. Do you have a tablet? And then you know what they would pull out if you said, do they have a tablet? We had an instance at our church, and one of my teachers, who's in her 80s, and who's fabulous and young and youthful, she said that she didn't get the text, T-E-X-T. I thought she meant text message. She was talking about the book. So you cannot discount the worldview. The worldview matters. And that's what I'm trying to get you to see, that I want you to stop making these people these mythical characters, and I want you to begin to look at them as flesh and blood people who walked, who had a point of view, and they were trying to make life better for themselves. And this was their search for God, just as we have our search for God within ourselves. So I hope that answers your question. Okay, Reverend, but it is written that the words of God is the same yesterday, today, and tomorrow. How can you say then that it is a century old? The word of God is not these words, honey. The word of God is the word that's written on your heart. This is a witness to what other people heard, but you got to hear. You got to hear. You got to go in. You got to listen. You got to get quiet, and what is God saying to me? God has not stopped speaking. What is God saying to me? What is the Spirit saying in my heart? Because I have a calling. Jesus had a calling. I got a calling. You have a calling. What is the Spirit saying to you? And here's the thing. You're supposed to go beyond the teacher. If you don't go beyond the teacher, the learning stops. So when Jesus said, great things have I done, but greater things have you do, we're meant to go beyond where Jesus went. And we're sitting here saying we could never live up. I'm not worthy. If Jesus is your teacher, you're meant to go beyond where Jesus went, which means you're supposed to heal the sick, raise the dead, feed the people, all of that. And you can take that literally, you can take that metaphorically, you can take that however you want to. But unless you go beyond the teacher, the learning stops. Okay, chemicalization. So another thing that happens while he is in Ephesus, he's there for 3 years. And so when he's there, essentially a riot erupts with Demetrius. And so when the word of truth remains anywhere for any length of time, it is bound to stir up something in the body. So chemicalization is a condition in the mind that is brought about by the conflict that takes place when a high spiritual realization contacts an old era state of consciousness. One of the best examples I know of chemicalization is the movie Inception. Now, I love Inception. At me and Christopher Nolan, we need to hang out. Me and his wife, Emma Thomas, we need to just go have lunch. One of the things that happens with Inception is that a new idea is being introduced into this man's mind. And the deeper they go in his mind, the more violent his mind becomes because it's resistant to a new idea. It is probably one of the best depictions of what it means to introduce a new idea to the mind. And with with a new idea like I am spirit, or I am divine, or I am love, or I am peace, if that idea is not anchored in you already, right, you start introducing that idea and holding that idea, and it literally, you can get an upset stomach. It'll manifest in some crazy way. Whatever your issue is, you know, some people have a stomach of steel that is, you know, that's not their issue. But then there are other people who have money issues. Wherever your issue is, whatever is the thing you need to work on, maybe you have addiction to sugar, or you've got relationship issues, or wherever your issue is, when you start holding that word of truth and trying to clean up your experience and clean up the desire center in you and pull it out of those mixed states of consciousness, it's going to press out in your body. It's going to show up in your experience. Now, the question is, what do you do? Demetrius stands for the material thoughts that create a material body. Your solution is to be still and know. Huge. Not simple, not easy. Be still and know. Most times what it is that we want to do is we want to get involved in whatever is happening. So we think that it is something that we need to get involved and do. But when things start to fall down around you, that is when you need to get calm. That is when you need to get completely silent. And what I mean by that is silent emotionally. Because what you are listening for is the voice of God. Most people have problems hearing the voice of God because they're so involved in the messes in their lives. But when the mess shows up, it's showing up because it's ready to go. And what keeps it there is that you get entangled with it, you get involved in it with your emotions, and it sits around for another 5 years. When things start to shake up in your experience, because if you will hold the thought, I am health, I promise you, the appearance of not health will show itself in some way. It might not be in the form of a cold, because that might not be your thing, but it might show itself in the form of ill health as far as money, or ill health as far as relationships. What you are meant to do is to remain emotionally centered. And all of the scripture tells you this: be still and know that I am God. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. The Lord is in the holy temple, let all the earth be silent before him. This is a repeat, right? A double-minded man is unstable in all his ways. If thine eye be single, thy whole body be full of light. It is the one pointed focus. You've got to clean up the desire. You got to clean it up. And then when you clean it up, know that there's going to be a reaction. There will be a reaction, because that's just how it works. And that's why I love Inception, because I feel like he just really nailed it as far as what chemicalization looks like. And whatever is showing up in the body is a reflection of what's happening in your mind. Clean up the mind and the body cleans up. If you don't get involved in what's happening in your world, and when I say involved, I mean emotionally involved. There may be some things that you need to do. You might be dealing with a foreclosure, or you might be dealing with a job situation, and you need to go ahead and send out applications. So this is not do nothing. This is about being emotionally still. This is about not getting emotionally wrapped up in what does not appear to be going right. And so part of what gives you that spiritual poise is the trust or the prayer work that you do. Alita wrote, I read somewhere that said something like, the more you have to do, the longer you, yes, the more you have to do, the longer, yes, the more you have to do, the longer you have to sit in the silence. Sit, trust it, take a chance. Okay, Bright, you asked me this question. I'm going to have to answer this one offline. How was Paul brought up and taught, as we know that he was a great apostle? Or maybe I can. It is the book of Acts that that gives us the information about Paul. But to be clear, one of the challenges with Paul is that when Paul and Acts tell the same story, Paul always disagrees. So you brought up the point where Paul says in Galations, because he's being called on the carpet, right? And he's basically saying, chapter 1, verse 11. For I want you to know, brothers and sisters, that the gospel that was proclaimed by me is not of human origins, for I did not receive it from a human source, nor was I taught it, but I received it through a revelation of Jesus Christ. That's Galatians. If you go over to Acts, I think it's in chapter 9. In Acts chapter 9, it basically says that Paul goes to Jerusalem and he's taught by the apostles. It says chapter 9, verses 26 through 31. Right? So the thing is that Paul is very emphatic, right? I mean, he even goes so far as to say, on this I do not lie. This is what he writes in Galatians. And yet in Acts, it says very clearly that he went to Jerusalem and was taught by them. So that's the issue with some of the things about Paul, is that whenever Paul is a witness for his own life, he says something completely different from what Acts says. So when Acts tells us something about Paul and we don't have Paul to stand as a witness for himself, we don't know if we can trust Acts as a historical source. We don't know much about how he was brought up. We can guess by his work that he is trained religiously. He says that he's a Pharisee. We know that he was a Roman citizen, and we know that he was zealous, and so we know that on some level that he was a very committed person, and that probably was something that was modeled for him, what it meant to be a committed person. That there was probably somebody in his life that was like that modeled that for him and made it something that he wanted to do. Because even when he was persecuting Christians in the beginning, he was a zealot. So he brought that same zealot. It's not like when he converted, he brought a new level of zealousness. He just became zealous for something different. But we don't know a lot about him. What's interesting is that he does give us, and this isn't something he does in any of the other letters, in Galatians, he actually does give us a kind of a sketch of his life in chapters 2 and 3. But it is a sketch from the perspective of, like, let me tell you why you can trust what it is that I'm saying. And so, and he spends about 2 chapters doing that. Let me see if I have, oh goodness, I have other questions. Janelle in Jamaica. Hey, Janelle. Janelle says, just to say in agreement with you, Rev, I know we miss out on so much that God has for us because we are so caught up in the old interpretation of spiritual truths. Even worse, other people's interpretation of the truth. Yes. Yes, absolutely. Alita wrote, she wrote, the Bart Ehrman book, is it the New Testament or the introduction to the New Testament? You know what, Alita? I'll email you afterwards. It's the one. It says it's the 5th edition. I can tell you that. It is the historical introduction to the early Christian writings. So I just want to give you this last piece before we go. So this is our call to action. The call to action is to choose peace. That our work is to remain calm. That while the word of truth in us, while the Paul in us is cleaning out those error states of consciousness, stay calm. You cannot change established states of thought without some kind of commotion. So you've got to go in and proclaim the word of truth to yourself. You've got to notice the big and the little changes that happen within you, because you've got to celebrate them. When something happens and is good, put on a half-hour of music and dance around and give thanks and praise to God, or whatever your thing is. Maybe take a walk or write a letter to God, or whatever it is. The chemicalization, which is that commotion, can manifest in physical ways. It is going to depend on who you are. It could be sickness in the body, but it could be sickness in your money. It could be sickness in your relationships. It could be craziness on the job. You could get fired. I mean, you just never know how it's going to manifest. Your job is to never relinquish your power to control your focus. And what do I mean by that? I mean that every thought that you have produces a set of emotions. So the set of emotions that you have are dependent on the thoughts that you think. So, for example, if I think about a failed relationship, there's a range of emotions that are available to me depending on how I see that relationship. If I think about something that I did, high school, I really want to be a cheerleader. Oh gosh, really want to be a cheerleader. Couldn't split, right? Couldn't really jump really high. You know, that just wasn't my thing. And so I didn't make it, but I tried out year after year after year. And for a long time, that was something that I really wanted that I didn't get. And I'm one of those people that, like, if I want it, I feel like I should have it. But I didn't get it. To think about that opens up, at a certain point in my life, would open up a range of emotions. Those emotions can't show up if I don't think about it. So you've got to remember, when you're making changes in your heart and making changes in your mind, that you control the power of focus. It will feel like I need to pay attention to this thing, but you do not. You need to do what you need to do to handle it. So if there's a financial issue, handle it. If there's a relationship issue, handle it. If there's a health issue, handle it. But your focus and your attention is on the Word of God. Your focus and your attention is on the Christ Spirit that lives inside of you. Because what you're doing is you're managing the emotions that you are allowing to express through you. And so peace is not something that comes to you. Peace is something that you choose. And then it's simply just to trust the process. There's a process to changing your mind, and you can trust it. It will work out for you, and it won't kill you. I had another question. Andrea says, so do we all have a calling, Rev? Yes. We all have a calling, period. The silence, the gap can be so elusive at times. Yes. That's why you got to practice getting there. What else? Okay, I think that's it. Thank you guys for tonight. Thank you. I kind of feel like I went all over the map. So, and I've been trying to do my best to focus. Oh gosh, blog posts, new blog posts. Hey, I'd love it if you guys go leave a comment on the blog post, please. If you haven't signed up for my newsletter, please head over to revsherri.com and sign up for my newsletter. And then course ideas. So this series on Paul goes until the Wednesday before Thanksgiving. We won't have class on Thanksgiving, but we'll reconvene the following Thursday night. And so I need ideas. A couple people gave me ideas. Someone said it'd be great to look at the prophets in the Old Testament. somebody said the Sermon on the Mount, another person said the Gospel of John. So if there's something, but I need to know now so that I can start preparing the lessons, so that I can like kind of think through how to lay everything out and gather materials and all of that. So if you can let me know what you're interested in going into next, that would be great. All right. Thank you so much for tonight. I bless you and I release you in the love and the light of the Christ. And I affirm that the light of God surrounds us, the love of God enfolds us, the power of God protects us, and the presence of God watches over us. Wherever we are, God is, and so it is. Have an absolutely marvelous, marvelous evening. Take care.